consumers start talking, whether you're watching live or watching back the recording. I'm delighted to be here with you today to talk about a very interesting new topic, AI agents, and ask the big question of whether they're actually ready to start to run our lives. AI agents have been emerging into the spotlight for a while. They're powered by sophisticated generative AI, and they have the ability to not just suggest or make recommendations, but to actually make decisions or take action on our behalf. Does that sound good? Personal online butler? Or do you feel like we might be ceding a bit too much power and responsibility to the algorithm? How can we make sure that AI agents really can judge what's best for us, that they can put people before profit? And do we think we have the right laws in place to protect consumers as the latest disruption comes towards markets? I'm really pleased to be here today to discuss all of these questions and hopefully some more with a very excellent panel. Can I introduce you to them now? We first up have Professor Dr. Christoph Busch from the European Legal Studies Institute. Welcome, Christoph.
Thank you for having me. Welcome.
Thank you. Next up, we have Gam Diaz, who is a product strategist and author of Agents Unleashed. Hello, Gam.
Hi there. Great to be with you.
And we have Julia Smackman, who is from the UK's Ada Lovelace Institute. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you. Hi.
We also have Martin Signew from OpenAI. He's the policy lead for AI in Europe. Hi, Martin.
Hello.
And, hey. And we also have Gary Temple from the US consumer organization, Consumer Reports.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Welcome, everybody. It's great that you're all here. So the title of the webinar asks whether AI agents are ready to run our lives. Let's look at how ready they are and to come into the consumer mainstream. And before that, what they actually are. What do we mean by that? Julia, I'm going to come to you first and ask, what do we mean when we talk about AI agents or AI assistants?
That's a really good question. And I think it's really good that we're kicking off the conversation by talking a little bit about what these technologies actually are before getting into the thick of it of why they're good or maybe where the challenges are. So I work for the Ada Lovelace Institute, and we're an institute that really cares about how technologies impact on people and society at large. And we do a lot of work to try to explain emerging technologies like AI assistants or AI agents. So about a year ago, we started thinking about assistant technologies as potentially being very impactful over the course of the next few years, and that can have like a very real impact on people and society as a whole. So in order to research this technology, we first had to ask ourselves, what are AI assistants and how do we distinguish them from older technologies? What's the difference between an AI assistant, an AI agent, a virtual assistant, all those different kinds of terms? So I'll do a little bit of talking about the definitions, and then I'll do a little bit of contrasting of assistants or agents with earlier technologies to kind of set the scene of what we're talking about here. So through desk research, reading other people's definitions, and speaking to people from industry and different sectors, we've landed on the following definition in our own report, which is that we define advanced AI assistants as LLM-based or foundation model-based AI systems that are able to engage in fluid, natural language conversations with users, and that are designed to play particular roles in guiding and taking action for users. So basically the kind of technologies that are really nice to interact with, and it can also help you do things or do things for you. So within that definition of advanced AI assistants, we distinguish between three sort of subtypes. The first one of which is most relevant for this discussion, which is what we call executors, but other people call AI agents. And those are the kinds of assistants that can take action on the world directly on a user's behalf. The second category is what we would call advisors. So these are the kind of assistants that maybe don't directly act on the world, but they can give advice to a user on how to achieve a certain goal. So you can think of AI lawyers or AI financial advisors kind of in this context. And then the third one is what we call interlocutors. So these are the more sort of relational assistants that are more aimed at bringing a change in a user's mental state. So they act more on the user. And this is, for instance, AI therapists or AI companions. So we see those sort of three subcategories in a bigger sort of umbrella of what we call advanced AI assistants. And in a different paper that I wrote on AI agents more specifically, we have a more specific definition of agents, which is basically autonomous systems are capable of executing complex open-ended tasks with limited human oversight. And so you get that sort of autonomy aspect to in it a little bit more. And just very shortly, what is new about these kinds of assistants and agents in comparison to previous technologies? So what we compared them with was, for instance, the virtual assistant, which is like a Siri or an Alexa from, say, 2018, 5 years ago, and what are the differences between that technology and the new technology that we now have. So the big difference in underlying technology is that advanced AI systems, or what we now call agents, are based on foundation models or large language models that use probabilistic reasoning. The older models, so the older Siri, Alexa, they use more rule-based reasoning. That's basically like a very complex decision tree. So these older types of Siri, Alexa type technologies, they can respond to lots of different kinds of questions, but the responses are always sort of pre-programmed, they're predictable, they might be able to respond to a lot of things, but it's still always sort of preset what they can respond to. This also makes them slightly more transparent. Whereas the new generation of advanced AI assistants, they are probabilistic, so that means that they can basically, by prediction, predict what the right sort of response is to a query of a user. This makes them more unpredictable, but it also makes them much more flexible and versatile. So they can respond to basically an unlimited amount of questions. They can respond very interactively with you, which is really nice. And also sometimes they have access to more tools than the previous sort of technologies had, which allows them to take more actions on the world. So basically the big difference is, on the one hand, more flexibility and versatility, more sort of general use, and just nicer to interact with. But on the other hand, we have this sort of trade-off, and that makes them a bit less predictable and a bit less transparent. So that's,
thank you. That's a good explanation. And as is often the case, like the more sophisticated and closer to the way that you might interact with a human, the less transparent and the harder it is to pick apart what's going on. And that's what tends to make the regulators scratch their heads a bit. Gam, what's an AI agent to you? How do you conceptualize it, or if you're talking to people about it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I spend quite a lot of time helping large organizations, enterprises understand this technology and how to incorporate it into their value propositions. And so I get them to think about a capable assistant that lives in a defined space, that's really able to interpret what I say, infer what I'm trying to accomplish, carry out some research, be able to reason, make a plan and take action, and then report back on the action. And so it's that assistant that we have to prompt heavily. Now, I think one of the things that the LLM companies have been really good at is anthropomorphizing the LLMs. So we tend to feel they're very human, and people are now having conversations with them. Yet we have to keep remembering that they don't understand in the way we do. I mean, they are naive. They how do we put, if we look at how an agent operates, sometimes we might think it's a hallucination, or they are overly kind in how they praise us as we do things, sometimes correctly or incorrectly. And someone said, I think it's a guy called Samiran Ghosh in India, he said, these aren't bugs in the system. These are features of a species level imitation. So as well as being big probability engines, what they are also doing is they're continually responding on how we humans react to what they give us. So I was reading Julia's report, and I think, I like the framing of advisor, executor, interlocutor, but I don't see them as separate kind of buckets. I see an agent doing all three things simultaneously. If you just take a robo financial advisor, they're advising me on what to do, they're executing, but at the same time, they're changing my behavior, my mindset. So I think agents will start to combine all of those roles.
Right. So it won't be so clear cut between them. Yeah. Okay. Gary, you work for Consumer Reports. That's one of the most innovative consumer organizations in the world, I'd say, and you're looking at helping with the AI testing program. Can you just give us your take on not just what is agentic AI or what it isn't? Like where do people sometimes get confused with the terms?
I think like we already have things laid down very nicely where the fundamental understanding is that like an agent is just an LLM in a small fine-tuned capacity. That's like an SME in a certain capacity. So you might do task disaggregation, you have code and you have code writing and you have code execution, you have code checking. So you might want 3 agents to do those things because they do it better. There's more computational energy being put behind these different tasks that you want done. I think that maybe I'll pivot a little bit. Like I think that where the big impact is in persuasion. Like the models are already very, very good at persuasion. And this is a big problem, like, because it just knows so much more about how to persuade us than we are capable of, like, resisting. And then I will point in my work for Consumer Reports, like what I want to do this year is think about these things happen just in the last 2 months. All the large language model makers made partnerships in 3 ways: advertising, shopping, and payments. And in every one of those areas, you have like a lot of risk to the human, who's trying to like retain their agency. And, like ad tech of 20 years ago was very powerful. It became much more powerful. But as the earlier point raised, these systems are so much more capable of like moving us, changing our consciousness, like Gam said, like changing how we feel. We don't even notice. So like that's the work. And there's tons of just like basic testing stuff that has to be confronted about like novel privacy and security risks that agents present. So I'm working on that. But advertising, shopping, payments, where what looks like what's going to happen very quickly is like we're moving to a different way of consumption that's a lot more like the fulfillment of expectations than it is like a payment. And so agents are going to be right in here, and like OpenAI partnered with Shopify, and like these things are happening like very, very rapidly. And are they going to sell ads? Maybe they're not selling ads. What they're going to do is turn my consciousness to make me believe different things about how I should shop, and I'll just do it. You know what I'm saying? So.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that later. And I like that idea of that these models are learning, knowing more about how to persuade us than we will probably ever know about how to resist. But I just want to get into to paint a picture of how far away we are from a kind of mainstream rollout for tasks. Obviously, things are moving quickly. Gam, can you give some sort of somewhat solid examples of what an agent might do? So, for example, in travel.
Yeah, sure. Travel's great because once upon a time we had travel agents. They happen to be human, and I think with all the online travel booking companies, we took all the tasks away from those agents and we gave them to ourselves. So now we're now somewhat stuck with 1 million tabs open and a week's worth of research trying to book travel. However, if you think about the tasks of booking a holiday that includes a hotel, a flight, and a car, so what the agent is going to do for you is you're going to give it some fairly large requirements. I need to go away over this period. I'm not quite sure when, but here's my window. I want this area roughly, but I'm open. I want this type of hotel. So that's the first step. It's like giving the agent the ability to research, and it will go off and do what agents are really good at doing, is going off to all of the websites and researching this stuff. Now, a lot of the LLM tools now can read a website as a human can and make that interpretation. And that was a big leap, because now it can go out to the web and do research for us. And then if equipped correctly, it can actually carry out the booking. Now, this requires some human in the loop to say, yes, this is the type of hotel I want. So it'll give me a short list and it'll give me the hotels and it can go ahead and book it. Now, on the other side of that, the travel companies need to make all that data available to the agents. Now, the agent doesn't really care about your brand, about your front end, about the color scheme. It wants hard information. So what it's going to be able to do is evaluate thousands of flights or thousands of flight, hotel, car combinations that we as humans would find it impossible to do. So the travel organizations need to make all of that information available, machine readable and available to agents. So there's lots of new protocols like MCP and A2A that make all that available. Now, things like a little bit of negotiation, that may come too. I'm looking for this. Can you fit me a package? Oh, I can't quite meet your price. Can you reduce the features? So the agent's going to need to be able to do that as well. And then there's one final piece, which is, I think it's possibly the most innovative and important piece. I guess it's empowerment technology. So things like personal data vaults that will hold my holidays, my calendar, my family requirements. So when I instruct an agent to go and look for this stuff, it can automatically go into my personal data vault, and I'll give it access to certain aspects. Here's the budget, here's my family context, and it can pull that information. And so what's most interesting about that is I could ask an agent to go out and create that request, and it will sit there and watch over a period of time and then come back to me. So it has such potential for reducing human effort in these legwork tasks that we need to do. Now, obviously that comes with huge risk.
Okay.
Well, I'm sure.
Yeah, we're going to be coming on to the risks later. I'm just trying to get a picture of how that would work. And I think that's really interesting, because the point, what you're saying there about making something like a travel booking easier, is that actually the promise of being able to do everything online ourselves has just created a lot more tasks for us, shifted the onus onto us. We're doing it, without being paid, taking on jobs that were previously done by other people. And actually, it doesn't always feel that easy. The barrage of notifications, kind of advertising, recommendations. So it's like the vision that we can all be empowered to go out and do things online. It is failing slightly, I'd say, or it's getting very messy and not as exciting as it once was when it first came around. Martin, I'm going to come to you now. I mean, obviously, OpenAI, one of the most well-known companies behind generative AI and getting out these technologies to mass audiences. You maybe reflect on what the others have said, but also I'm interested in what OpenAI's operator is doing. How did you get to the point of where you are now, and how do you see it growing and developing?
Yeah. I think something that is really important, has been said by both Julia and Gam, is agents are diverse. The very concept of like AI agents actually covers a wide diversity of agents. And operator, I will speak more about it in a second, but operator is just like one form. It's just one kind of its agents. And maybe it's important to first contextualize why all of a sudden we are talking about agents, because this year, it's all about agents. People were calling 2025 the years of agent, agentic era, and so on. And the important thing to understand is that AI agents are basically a new paradigm, but they really fit into a classic evolution of the technology. Most people actually discovered AI through chatbots. A couple of years back, ChatGPT was obviously one of the main like event that made people like basically use for the first time like an AI and really feel the AI. But chatbots have been around for quite some times. And obviously chatbots are fairly limited, in what they can do versus like interactive, and chatbots originally were like limited to like the knowledge they had from like their pre-training base. And that was it. You could speak with it, but nothing more. And then progressively, if you look at like the progress of research, there's been tons of progress in reasoning, for example, advanced reasoning, the ability for agents to think longer term and reflect a little bit like ourselves with like system 1, system 2, you can have your system 1, that's like the two concepts from Kalman, where system 1 is like you impulsively respond to something, system 2, you pause, take a moment, think twice about like, how you're going to accomplish the task and so on. And when you put together like all the progress we've made on the research front, like advanced reasoning, multimodality, being like the ability to deal with like sounds, to deal with images too, and not only with text. When you think about like the progress we've made in terms of like reliability and safety of the systems, all of that have unlocked like the ability for AI systems to do multi-step tasks and to do things that are far more advanced than what a models could do. And one thing that is really important to understand is that the technology is moving pretty fast. And what we have today is definitely completely different from what we had 2 years ago, and what we will have 2 years from now is going to be completely different. So it's like very important to remain curious, remain agile in how we apprehend these technologies. Now, when it comes to OpenAI, I think we've deployed over the past few months a couple of like agents that reflect the diversity. So you have Operator, that is basically this like computer using agent that can do a couple of like things that Gam was mentioning. You can prompt it about like, find me a hotel in this area between like this time range and within this budget. You can ask it to like find like a website that offers like these kind of like certain things you're interested in. So these are like the computer using agents. And obviously, because these are powerful tools, they are like strict guardrails that we put together. For example, like the ability for users to like keep the control when a decision is made, when something is like actioned, when it comes to payment, when it comes to sending an email, stuff like that. That's for Operator. And then we have like also deployed like a couple of other tools. Like there's Deep Research, for example. You can think about it as like basically an agent that can synthesize knowledge. It can go on the web for like 15, 20 minutes, look for information, read reports, and basically go back to you with like something that is very dense. It can help, for example, literature review in molecular science, or just help a consumer like find a very niche item. If you want a very specific piece of furniture for your house, something like that. It has the ability to really go deep. And the time we would have spent like browsing, going through like hundreds of websites, maybe it can do that within 15 minutes. And another model we have, another agent we released was Codex. Codex is like an AI coding agent. So basically the ability to like write and execute code. And so this is obviously more for like developers that are really already versed into coding. And then an important part too is like all the building blocks we've released for developers and technical folks to build their own agents. We've released a suite of like product, the responsive APIs, the agent SDK, but are basically all these building blocks that developers will need to build their own agents. Because at the end of the day, the limit is just like what you can think about, the kind of like task you're trying to tackle, and to just go and experiment and try to build your agent to solve that particular task. That can be something fairly simple, as like triaging email to facilitate your work, or that can be something fairly complex, as like, I want like my coding agent to like update my website on a monthly basis based on the feedback I've got from consumers and so on, these kind of things. And it's really important to stress that all the benefits that agent holds are decided by like who the person that like use and builds on top of these tools. And it's really what we're trying to do, both with like the off-the-shelf tools agents that we are releasing, Codex, Deep Research Operator, and with the building blocks that we are putting in the hands of developers. We're just trying to make agents more useful for people, and the benefits are like, immense and potentially unlimited in terms of like productivity, in terms of inspiration, in terms of like solving tedious tasks, so we can focus on more complex tasks, assisting us in more complex tasks. And it's like true for like scientists, for consumers, for large organization, for a wide range of like persons at the end of the day.
Sure. I mean, I think we're getting the sense from all of these opening comments that it's disruptive. It's a new level of capability, and as with the conversations around AI, that's always going to be there's always going to be pros and cons to that, and risks and opportunities. I think we'll come back to that a bit later. I wanted to bring Christoph in here, who's going to bring a sort of legal angle here. We've already started talking in that first section about, people being more, machines knowing more about how to persuade us than we can resist. We're having there's some comments about who's accountable, the user, the vendor, and then some further comments about what contract terms are appropriate. This sounds like it's right in your wheelhouse. So could you tell us a bit about how the consumer law we have now can empower and protect consumers when we have a world where machines are making decisions on our behalf?
Well, let me start with a general observation. I think EU consumer law, as it stands now, is not very well equipped to deal with this new reality of AI-driven commerce or agentic commerce. Why? Well, because consumer law is based on the premise that humans are making decisions to conclude a contract. Humans are making consumption decisions, and therefore consumer law is designed with the weaknesses and needs of human consumers in mind. And the instruments, the various instruments of consumer law, be it rights of withdrawal, mandatory disclosures, etc., and the rules on unfair commercial practices are meant to ensure that humans take an informed decision and are not manipulated when taking decisions. Well, this premise that humans are making decisions on the market no longer holds in this brave new world of agentic commerce, because there the reality will be more complex. There will still be old school human consumers buying online as they do now and did a few years ago, but then there will be augmented consumers who will use tools like ChatGPT to help them find the right item. And then there will be what some scholars call algorithmic consumers. That are the AI agents to whom consumers delegate their consumption decisions. So there will be, you might say, various species on the market, new species. And consumer law should reflect this new reality. And that actually might have a profound impact on how the instruments of consumer law work. Think of information duties, one of the staples, one of the, let's say, main instruments of EU consumer law. There's a lot of debate on how effective mandatory disclosures are, or whether they are effective at all, because of problems of information overload, information mismatch, etc. Well, maybe information overload will not be much of a problem for AI agents, because they can digest, analyze a much larger amount of information. So this issue might become less important. And then there are other issues. What about dark patterns? There's a lot of debate on dark patterns, how to regulate dark patterns, design features that are meant to manipulate human consumers. But if a human consumer is not taking the consumption decision, but delegates the decision to an AI agent, maybe some dark patterns that work on humans don't work on AI agents. Maybe AI agents won't be tricked by the color of buttons that you click, for example. But then there might be new vulnerabilities. And maybe rogue traders that are now trying to manipulate human consumers will turn to AI agents and try to manipulate their vulnerabilities. Things like prompt injections, adversarial image perturbations, simple changes in an image on a website that a human wouldn't maybe even see, but that derails an AI agent and leads to a situation where the AI agent maybe discloses information or makes a purchasing decision that is not in the interest of the consumer. So what I'm saying is the risk profile of online retail will change, and consumer law should respond to this.
That's so interesting, and it's sort of different to, I think, what people would expect. There's, I think we're used to seeing the harms and risks that are increased as consumers engage more with digital, but this idea that it may be the AI agents which are actually being manipulated and misled, and what on earth we do about that, it is really interesting. So at the moment, so do you think this raises big questions for the basis of consumer law? And how well equipped do you think a body like the Commission and the EU are to take these on?
Well, as you know, and as probably a lot of people in our audience are aware of, the European Commission is currently preparing the Digital Fairness Act, what Commissioner McGrath has called the flagship initiative of the current mandate. And I would suggest, I would strongly advise that the Commission looks into the topic of AI agents and tries to address this topic in the Digital Fairness Act. It might look a bit science fiction now, but if you think at the EU legislative timeline, we're expecting the DFA proposal late in 2026, maybe even early 27, and then there will be 2 years of negotiations. And once the rules apply, we're already in the 2030s. And I'm convinced that AI agents will be part of our reality then. So if the DFA does not address AI agents, there's a certain risk that the Digital Fairness Act is outdated before it even applies.
That I mean, that's an accusation that quite a lot of laws around digital get. It feels to me like we've got very good at analysing and creating like taxonomies of the problems, but actually getting things there in place in time is still a challenge. To that end, there's been a really interesting note that's come in from someone watching, which is that if AI agents take lots of different forms and fulfill different functions, do we need to just look at where they fit with existing obligations? So if it looks like a search engine and functions like a search engine, it should comply with what we already have in EU law for that. I mean, could it be, Christoph, that AI agents will become the new intermediaries, and therefore would they be covered under the DSA at the moment?
That's a good question. It's not even clear whether or to what extent generative AI tools like ChatGPT, not talking about AI agents, just talking about ChatGPT as it is used at the moment, falls under the DSA. There's a controversy about this, whether it is an intermediary that provides access to third-party content. Is the answer that ChatGPT gives you, is this third-party content? Is it ChatGPT's own content? That's an open question. And the DSA is concerned to a large extent about content, third-party content, providing access to content, how intermediaries, hosting providers, platforms should deal with illegal content. That's a big concern of the DSA. With AI agents, we're not just talking about content, we're talking about actions, and that's something different. So I think the DSA is as it stands now, is not the right tool for AI agents. You might find some elements there. There are rules on recommender systems in the DSA, Article 27, Article 38, for example. So you might say that an AI agent that helps you to find the right product acts like a sort of recommender system, which not only recommends but then also buys on your behalf. But these are bits and pieces you find in the DSA. I think we need something new alongside the DSA.
Okay, so we've got some of the provisions and principles there, but we may need more. I'm going to stick really because of the comments that are coming in, which again are about accountability and liability, because this seems to be key. Gary, you're talking about whether an LLM system can actually be made to comply. Are we asking the right questions? Do you think that's even possible?
I think it's just a really hard challenge where it's like, if you ask the LLM the same question 3 times, it may give you 3 different answers. And the makers of the LLM can rightly say, like, this is not a deterministic system, so you can't really blame us for output you don't like. And the model is doing what? Well, its output is an abstraction from the training environment that you put it in. It has been trained, exposed to certain pieces of information. And then when you ask it, it makes an abstraction. Now, so when it comes down to advertising, shopping, and payments, the question will be, where was there misbehavior, and where in the chain of causality that caused me to buy a red shirt on a Friday? Was there misbehavior? Was there persuasion? And everyone who is serving the tool, everyone who is serving the model can rightly say, there's no line of code that made the person do that. There isn't. The model makes a certain interpretation, it makes a certain abstraction, and it delivers a personalized experience that maybe could be really great. And I wanted a red shirt, or I seem to. So yeah, I think it's a really fundamental, hard question that's a crossover moment for all of us. Like, how do you assign responsibility, the chain of causality that leads to the human taking action, when you're dealing with probabilistic systems? There is no line of code that's misbehaving that you could say, hey, I don't like what you did with that line of code. That was not nice. That was unfair.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That feels like a tricky one. I don't think we're going to answer it today. Martin and Gam, have you got any thoughts on how you would, establish that chain and the liability and accountability?
That's a very tricky question indeed.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy one to answer. But maybe the start, or at least the way we approach these problems at OpenAI, is about building safe and reliable agents and underlying models. And I think everything starts with really the underlying models, because behind the agents there are models. They are these foundation models that we are training, and we're basically developing them to be safe by design with the responsibility in mind. And it means that we have a baseline protocol of safety. We were one of the first AI company out there to publish its protocol called the Preparedness Framework. That was in 2023. We've updated it this year to basically identify certain risks that we are particularly monitoring and tracking for any models we develop. Basically, it all starts with thorough testing. So before even deploying the models during the development phase, it's all about testing the model and making sure that the model is behaving in a way that is appropriate and safe. So there are all kinds of testing relating to jailbreak, to prompt injections, a couple of things we've talked about here, testing about harmful refusals, testing about cyber risks, bio risks. And these are all the kind of risks that we test before releasing a model. And we document that and publish that in a system card that is publicly available. And we do that for the models, but we also do that for the agents. If you look at Deep Research, Codex, Operator, the couple of agents I've mentioned before, we've published system cards that basically document the kind of testing and the results of this testing to know if they are really robust and if they are really reliable. So at the end of the day, if they can be trusted. And on top of these foundation layers of testing and safety approach that we have, we take into account the specificities of the agents, because as we've discussed extensively, all agents are not equal. All agents are not able to do the same thing. And obviously there are specificities. If you take like operator, for example, it can take like actions on your behalf on like websites, can do payments, can send emails and so on. And so basically what we did when thinking about like the potential risks is that we implemented certain guardrails. For example, the takeover mode. So for example, if you need to process a payment, you will have to take control over the operator and do the payment yourself. It's not going to pay on your behalf. For logging in certain websites, if you want, for example, your agents to go and summarize like all the message you got on LinkedIn, for example, you will have yourself to log in. The agent's not going to log in on the platform for yourself. And these are basically the kind of guardrails that at the end of the day make sure that the consumer or the user remains in control, because that's something that is extremely important. If we take another example like Codex, for example, the coding agent, an agent that can execute code can basically create vulnerability potentially. If it like create like insecure code, or if it like executes something that is like not fit for purpose for what you were asked, what you asked the agent to do. And basically the approach we had there was like about designing Codex, this coding agent, to operate like in a secure, contained way that is like isolated from the web. So basically before you actually approve the modification that the agent has been coding, you have the ability to test it in a contained environment, so it does not spread out in the wild all of a sudden. And I think these are the kind of like guardrails that we put in place. We're taking that extremely seriously to make sure that the benefit clearly outweighs like the potential risks that we see. And it really starts with that, so testing thoroughly before deploying, and then after deployment, it's all question about like monitoring potential misuse and making sure that the technology is like employed in a way that it was designed to do. And one last point I think that is extremely important too is that we have this concept of like iterative deployment, meaning that the technology that we build, we do not release it in the wild all of a sudden. So if you take Operator, for example, it was started in January as a research preview, and it's only available to pro users. So users that are paying like the highest fee of subscription, and it's only available for like people above 18. So we are basically releasing the technology in a gradual way to make sure we have like an informed feedback loop about like all the technologies employed in the world. And we can basically think twice and reassess our own mitigation and apply new ones if needs be.
Sure, thanks very much. I suppose what I'm interested in is those very clear-cut harms around, say, security, cybersecurity, or stopping something, making a recommendation which is harmful or illegal. There's also a whole set of other harms, and I'd like to bring Julia back in here from the work that you've done. You sometimes describe them as sort of psychological harms, and I think this might be where some people are worried about that, back to the point that Gary made about the powers of persuasion that an AI agent would have, which obviously, depending on the motivations of the agent, could be potentially harmful to people. But Julia, could you very quickly just give us an overview of some of the things you found in your research?
Yeah, sure. So like you said, we see this whole range of sort of more security type risk, but we also see a lot of harms basically stemming from, well, the fact that, as discussed before by at various points in this discussion, that AI assistants are really quite persuasive and they learn your preferences over time, which basically means that as they gather more data on you, they become more personalized towards your preferences, and you're essentially creating an assistant that kind of knows what you want, but also knows what you want to hear. And that's quite important, because in the end, the business model usually of companies that are developing a technological product is for people to keep using it and keep coming back. And that is partially due to the usefulness of the product, but it's also potentially due to the sort of engagement you have with that, and especially with the kind of technologies like assistants that are more anthropomorphic. It might also be dependent on the kind of almost relationship you build up with it. So we kind of create a system that is always available to you. It's very agreeable to you. And in some more extreme cases, we've unfortunately seen some examples of that over the past few months and years, we see that individual users, particularly vulnerable people like young people, have sort of created an increased dependency on these systems to an extent that they've become so heavily dependent on their mostly AI companions or like general purpose AI assistants that they've started to put them above the human relationships in their lives and actually become quite isolated, which has led to them developing quite severe mental health problems. So that's obviously like a very big, scary part of that. And obviously this will not affect every single person who uses ChatGPT, but there is a subgroup of people who are more vulnerable to this kind of addictiveness and emotional dependency that people can develop. So that is a group of users we should keep in mind when developing these kind of systems and also create safeguards for. And kind of on the other sort of less extreme end of that persuasiveness and that how it gives you recommendations, we said before that leads to certain economic harms around like how it may sway your decisions. And yeah, as I think Chris has mentioned before, we may need to rethink kind of what dark patterns and those kind of things look like in an age of AI agents and how it kind of sways your decision making, maybe also how the agent itself is being swayed by patterns on the web. One point I wanted to quickly make in response to sort of the question around accountability and control and those kind of questions is that both in the context of sort of the emotional dependency, maybe practical dependency on AI agents, is that we see a problem that we call de-skilling. And that can be both cognitive de-skilling or social de-skilling, which basically means that through reliance on AI systems and particularly AI agents, we see that people are losing certain skills that will allow them to basically build up social relationships in the real world, because having something that always agrees with you is quite different from building up human relationships. So prolonged engagement might impair over time your ability to engage in the real world with people. And on the sort of cognitive end of it, it might mean that by relying on the recommendations and argumentation given to you by your AI assistant, you're less able to make the sort of mental steps yourself. So we see a lot of reporting recently about students and universities being worried about how students are using these assistants because essentially it stops them from critically engaging themselves with the questions that they need to answer. And that is actually a really, really key part in the question we were addressing before about human oversight and accountability, because those kind of questions, allowing the human to oversee what an AI agent proposes to you and having this sort of checkpoint at a certain point, that presumes that people are actually able to check what the agent is doing, which is a question of transparency, but also that they have the ability to actually critically engage with what is being presented to them. And if over time people develop this reliability and they have less opportunity to exercise those critical skills, you will see that people are actually less well positioned to have that critical check function at the end. So that's why we really need to be thinking very critically about how we're designing these systems and how we can make sure that people keep those critical skills that we actually need. And because otherwise the human oversight question, we already know we have issues with people simply relying on computer systems in general, and with systems that are created like AI systems to be reliable and for people to start trusting them, that problem becomes even more critical.
That's really interesting. So it's sort of like we're possibly giving up some of those steps that we need to take to make decisions that make us human, and in order to get things done a bit quicker, which seems quite a trade-off. We've only got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to quickly come to Gam, who's going to pick up on a point that Martin made, and then I would like to talk a bit about the conflicts of interest that may arise with the funding of an AI agent. So Gam, very quickly, if you could pick up on that.
Yeah, just a quickie. Martin said two words that kind of piqued my curiosity here. You said by design, and then you said in the wild. And I wanted to kind of help the audience understand something different about AI agents. W.C. Fields said, never work with children and animals. I think the unpredictability of agents, forget that they're stochastic systems and we're never going to get the same result twice. But the other thing is, when we think about multi-agentic systems, my agent might be an orchestrator of 100 agents. And those 100 agents are going to be dealing with hundreds of other agents on the other end. So we're going to get agent-to-agent communications. And so to be able to test the millions and billions of permutations is a different paradigm to how we test things today. And what I see, what we haven't got yet is full enterprise readiness. You know, these agents are not fully observable. They're not fault tolerant. Things are a little bit sketchy in how they're going to perform over time, as not only the agent reprograms itself because of the human in the loop, but because the data that they're working on, if the data is out in the web or in databases, even the data is changing on a daily basis. So the real risk is in this multi-agentic system where we can test within our firewall, but we can't test within the thousands of firewalls that these agents are going to be deployed to. So it's just a new paradigm of how we need to be thinking about it.
Really interesting, especially from a consumer organization point of view, which also does its own independent testing of things. Gary, you've been looking at how you might test for AI in consumer products. Do you want to make a comment on that and the challenges of that?
Yeah, so what we're doing Q1 is to look at Consumer Reports digital standard, which is the work of Herculean effort over several years to make that standard, and from which we build our scoring rubrics and our ratings. And so question one is like, to what extent does the digital standard encounter agentic, and to what extent do we need to learn its limitations and then build more capacity? And we also have a thing called the Financial Fairness Framework. So right now, me and the team are working on like, what are the limits and what are the extensions? So we probably need extensions and we probably need inventions. And so we're finding that out. And we're mapping out like the novel problems that agentic behaviors in the home represent. So where we want to get at Q4 is like in position to score and rate the behaviors of agentic intelligence in the home. So that's our whole year project, is like develop the deep fundamental understanding, like deep academic sort of posture, so that we feel confident that we can advocate for consumers in a really deep and considered way.
Thanks, Gary. Christoph, I wanted to come back to you, really picking up on this sort of idea of whose interests are aligned, whether consumers' interests in use of AI agents are aligned with theirs. That's one of the principles that that was in your publication about digital assistants. Can you talk a little bit more about the challenge of a conflict of interest and what a solution might be?
Definitely, yes. A group of researchers commissioned by the European Law Institute has elaborated over the past 3 years a set of guiding principles and model rules for AI agents in consumer contracts, or AI assistants, as they are called in this text. And this text seeks to give a guidance for legislators, not only in Europe, but also beyond, on how to update consumer laws for agentic commerce. And one of the key principles there is, of course, that possible conflicts of interest have to be disclosed, because I'm convinced that just as we've seen it in the platform economy, conflicts of interest, possible conflicts of interest will be a major issue. Issues of self-preferencing, how to make sure that my agent acts in my best interest, whatever that may be, of course, how to make sure that the agent is not buying a product just because the seller of this product is paying the high commission to this to the provider of the agent. So that's an important issue. And I think the solutions for these problems will resemble, to a large extent, the solutions that we've seen in the platform economy. In one of the comments, the P2B regulation, the Digital Markets Act were mentioned, and there are rules on self-preferencing in these laws. And so I think we will see similar solutions here. Well, what we did in the European Law Institute is we tried to combine tools of contract law and ex ante design requirements, because currently a lot of consumer protection law is focused on contract law. It's focused on the magical moment when the contract is concluded. That's the moment when the consumer needs the right information, must not be manipulated. That's when rights of withdrawal become relevant. But in the agentic commerce, maybe there is no human at this moment, because the agent is acting on behalf of the human, and the human in the loop, the consumer, will be somewhere earlier when the agent is deployed, when the parameters are set. So if you want to protect consumers, you have to protect consumers at that point in time. And that is not done primarily through contract law, but through design requirements. So we need to combine contract law tools and design requirements. As in a sense, we're talking about product safety rules for AI agents.
That's a good way of looking at, product safety rules, and then what are the risks and the things that need to be made safe, and then you can look at all this, a sort of wider range of things. I'm thinking though that, and I want to ask this to Gam again, what isn't the problem? Won't the problem just be with how these things are monetized and funded? Because it's quite hard to get a critical, like enough through subscriptions, but so then won't falling back on like recommendations and commissions and advertising be the default? And then we're just back with the same problems we've had for a while.
We've not, since TV, I think, invented the sitcom, everything we've seen in the media has been sponsored to some extent or another. You know, we've got used to exchanging data for services. I think we might get saved by the malicious bots. If you think about web traffic in e-commerce, like 50% of web traffic is bots. Is bots, and a large percentage of those are malicious. And so I think there will be a time when instead of know your customer, it's know your agent. We will need provenance on that agent. Is it malicious? Is it sponsored? Or is it mine? And so if it's mine, then I'll pay for it. If it's sponsored, then I'm exchanging some degree of objectivity for what this agent is going to advise, or it's completely malicious and I should advise it. And maybe that might force, different ways of monetizing these things.
Interesting. Does anyone else want to comment on the monetization point? Do you think people would be willing to hire or pay for their agent?
We pay realtors and we pay financial advisors, and so I don't see why we wouldn't. If an agent is going to save me, $10,000 on a $10,000 vacation, if it's going to save me $1,000, can I pay $250 for it? Yeah, sure.
I suppose lots of it.
Right,
yeah.
but it's a really good question. How to induce loyalty in an agent to the user, like genuine loyalty, like the one that looks out for me, like how to induce that. And the answer is something like, I don't know, different training environments such that loyalty is the preserved, abstracted behavior of the thing. But this is like very hard, intellectual, conceptual, scientific question, like how to induce loyalty in an agent. If we could get one like that, I would buy one to look out for me. But can we get one like that?
Yeah, loyalty
Martin would know what's going on over there.
Loyalty or close to of best interest, so that's not blindly loyal to what you want, but is has a conception of best interest,
best
which
interest.
You get in financial services.
Even if I get it wrong one morning, the agent is like looking out for me. It's like, that's not how your diet plan is.
Two important dimensions for that is control and personalization. Can you personalize your agents? And to a certain extent, this is already what you can do, for example, on ChatGPT with like the custom GPT, where you give like the instruction and you can be like, every time you're going to answer a query from me, I want you to do X, Y, and Z. So you have the ability to personalize, and there is virtually nothing preventing tomorrow agents to be personalized as well. And the control as well is extremely important.
Well, but Martin, there's the sensation that I'm personalizing it, but am I in fact receiving a personalized experience of this intelligence that serves my requirements.
I invite you to try. I don't know if you've tried custom GPT, but between like the basic things you get, like if you go on simply on the website and the experience you get after like customizing your GPTs, it's completely different. And I think the underlying question is like AI literacy. How do we foster AI literacy among consumers, among the workforce, to basically know the boundaries, know how to get the most of the technology, and basically stay like very dynamic, because the technology is evolving extremely fast. What an AI can do today is definitely like miles away from what it could do a year ago, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important to stay dynamic, stay curious, and educate. It's like a shared responsibility. We're trying to do that with our OpenAI Academy, that is freely accessible online with some courses. But I think any organization should, in one way or another, think about like how it can foster AI literacy.
Okay, I'm going to have to draw this to a close, which is a real shame because I'd love to carry on. I just think, Martin, on the point of education, when you worked in the consumer world for a long time, that's often posed as the answer for almost everything, from sustainability right through to like being fully digitally literate. It's not enough on its own, so we need all the other things around it. One of the things that struck me that someone suggested in the comment was, why not having an AI agent to mediate contracts for people, or to even be checking and scoring AI agents? So can we actually get AI agents to do some of those consumer rights tasks, like to help you find redress, to help you, how many contracts have you entered into which were unfair, where you may be able to get compensation, things like that. So as well as thinking about how AI agents could help consumer services and transactions and make them easier, can we really empower people to be able to exercise their consumer rights? I think that would be an agent that I would probably pay for. Okay, but we've come to the end. Julia had to leave slightly early, but we thank her very much for her participation. Christoph, Gary, Martin, and Gam, thank you so much for coming along. I'm sorry we couldn't talk for longer. And thanks to everyone watching and commenting, and people who are watching back. Every month we have these webinars. They're available at Euroconsumer's website. You can rewatch this one and all the others from the last couple of years. And remember, you can also follow Euroconsumers on LinkedIn to keep up with all the latest consumer news. But for now, thank you very much and goodbye.
Power to the people, someone used to sing. And while singing is not our expertise, empowering people, empowering you is what we do. And in tune. How? We test, analyze, and compare products and services to ensure that they meet what you are looking for and comply with the law. We inform, advise, support, and represent consumers. And we do this in chorus, which is to say in several countries at the same time. Belgium, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Brazil. Then we dialogue, collaborate, and sue companies if needed to make sure people's and your needs are in the best hands. And in the end, we improve the market and we all win. Maybe it does deserve a song. What do you think? Euroconsumers. Empower people, improve the market.